안녕하세요. 미디어 심리학 5주 3차 시간회를 시작하겠습니다. 오늘의 주제는 챕터 5 의식입니다. 약물과 의식, 최면, 명상과 종교적 경험에 대해서 설명하도록 하겠습니다. 아이들은 어지러워서 땅에 쓰러질 때까지 뱅뱅 도는 행동을 하기도 하는데 이에는 이유가 있습니다. 정상적인 의식 상태에서 이탈된 상태에 관한 호기심이 있어왔고 역사를 통해 사람들은 춤, 단식, 노래, 명상과 자신들을 취하게 할 정도의 화학물질의 섭취를 통해 변형된 의식 상태를 경험하고자 하였습니다. 어떤 사람들은 현기증을 동반한 메스컴부터 중독 약물에 대한 집착에 이르기까지 희생을 감수하고라도 변형된 의식 상태를 추구합니다. 향정신성 약물은 뇌의 화학적 메시지 체계를 변화시킴으로써 의식 또는 행동에 영향을 미치는 화학물질입니다. 인간과 동물 모두 스스로 약물을 투여하는 약물 중독 행동을 보입니다. 약물 내성은 시간이 지남에 따라 동일한 효과를 얻기 위해서 약의 용량이 증가되는 경향입니다. 내성이 증가하면 약물 과잉 투여의 위험도 증가합니다. 약물 금단 증상에는 신체적 의존과 심리적 의존이 있습니다. 중독에는 여러 다른 정의가 존재합니다. 예를 들어 카페인, 알코올, 담배 등을 복용하는 것은 중독이라고 부르지 않습니다. 그러나 과거 혹은 다른 장소에서는 이들을 끔찍한 중독으로 여겨 금지하거나 검열하였습니다. 약물이 어떻게 우리의 정신에 영향을 미치는가를 이해하기 위해 약물을 몇 개의 범주, 즉 진정제, 흥분제, 아편제, 환각제와 마리화나로 구분합니다. 약물의 위험은 과량, 신체적, 심리적 측면으로 판단됩니다. 진정제는 중추신경계의 활성화를 감소시키는 약물입니다. 알코올은 진정제의 왕으로 일컬어집니다. 기대 이론이란 특정 상황에서 알코올이 어떻게 영향을 주는가에 대한 사람들의 기대에 의해서 알코올의 효과가 나타날 수 있다는 것입니다. 알코올 근시는 알코올이 주의를 방해해서 복잡한 상황을 단순하게 반응하게 합니다. 다른 진정제로는 불안, 심연 문제의 치료제로 처방되거나 마취제로 사용되는 바비츄레이트와 벤조디아제핀이 있습니다. 독성이 있는 흡입제는 코로 냄새를 맡거나 흡입하는 방법으로 내명되고 있습니다. 알코올이 뇌에 어떤 영향을 끼치는지 동영상을 보도록 하시겠습니다.
Here's a sobering thought just in time for the cocktail party you're probably attending tonight. Increasingly sophisticated brain imaging is revealing how chronic heavy drinking can change the structure of our brains, shrinking brain cells and damaging the connections between them, even in people who never seem intoxicated or obviously addicted. Here with the story is WSJ's Health and Science Senior Editor, Melinda Beck. Hi, Melinda. And so what do these new brain imaging systems tell us about what kind of damage is exactly happening to the brain?
Well, as you said in your intro, they can now see and not have to wait till autopsy studies. They can see that the gray matter, the actual neurons that are the structure of the brain, shrink. You know, you've probably heard, "Oh, you're killing brain cells." Well, you actually are if you're chronically heavy drinking, and more importantly, the white matter, that is the fibers that connect one part of the brain to the other and are really necessary for the brain telling the body how to react, how to think, that is also disrupted too.
And what part of the brain is at greatest risk for alcohol damage?
Well, the part that seems to be affected most is the frontal lobes, which is the seat of higher thinking, planning. It's often called executive function. And besides doing all of our, higher knowledge, that's the part of the brain that can sort of control our impulses. And
so it would be the part of the brain that would tell you to stop drinking.
Exactly.
If you were drinking too much.
Yes.
But then if you're impaired. So here's the tricky part, because obviously we all want to know what is okay and what's too much when we hear this sort of a story. And we have heard that a little bit of alcohol consumption can be beneficial, correct?
Yes, there are studies that show that moderate drinking, which is defined as maybe a little bit over nothing.
Right.
Really less than about a drink or two per day.
Right.
Can have cardiovascular benefits. It can hold off depression. But there too, it may just be that the people who are drinking that amount have good social lives, and that can help against depression too, but they're also able to control their drinking.
So let me ask you something, because we've often hear that one or fewer drinks a day is okay, but what happens if you don't drink all week and then have 4 drinks on Friday? Is that bad?
Well, this is why the National Institute of Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism has set up both weekly and daily limits.
I see.
So for a man, to keep yourself in pretty good odds of being okay, it's less than 4 drinks at any one day and less than 14 total in a week. Okay. And for women, it's less than 3 in any one day and less than 7 in a week. So you really don't want to save it all up for one day.
Right. So where it also gets sort of tricky is that researchers say your ability to consume alcohol and not sustain brain damage or any kind of damage afterwards is very individual,
It is,
correct?
Yes.
흥분제는 중추신경계를 흥분시켜 각성과 활성화 수준을 증가시키는 약물입니다. 흥분제의 종류로는 카페인, 암페타민, 니코틴, 코카인, 모다피닐, 그리고 엑스터시 등이 있습니다. 흥분제는 각성, 행복감, 자신감, 동기를 이끌어냅니다. 뇌에서 도파민과 노르에피네프린을 증가시킵니다. 초기의 코카콜라는 코카나무 잎으로 만들어졌습니다. 그런데 이것이 문제가 되자 코카인 성분을 제거한 코카나무 잎 추출물을 사용했습니다. 아편제는 매우 중독성 있는 약물로 통증을 완화하는 아편으로부터 얻습니다. 아편제의 종류로 헤로인, 모르핀, 메타돈, 코데인이 있습니다. 약물의 성질은 엔돌핀과 밀접한 연관이 있고 행복하고 편안한 기분을 야기하고 통증을 줄여줍니다. 이러한 드럭의 위험성에 대한 동영상을 보도록 하시겠습니다. 환각제는 감각과 지각을 변형시키는 약물인데 자주 환시와 환청을 초래합니다. 환각제의 종류로 LSD, 메스칼린, 실로시빈, PCP, 케타민이 있습니다. 효과는 극적이고 예측할 수 없습니다. 약물은 판단, 단기 기억, 운동 기능과 협응에 영향을 미칩니다. 활동 성분은 THC로 신경 전달 물질인 아난다미드에 반응합니다. 이 약물 사용은 논란이 많습니다. 지역에 따라서 마리화나가 합법인 곳도 있고 불법인 곳도 있는데 이러한 찬반 논쟁에 대해서 의사의 말을 들어보겠습니다.
Anyway, we're taking a closer look this morning at a sweeping report on the health effects of marijuana. The National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine published the results yesterday. Panel looked at medical and recreational use and examined more than 10,000 studies. Now, this is the most comprehensive review since 1999, well before attitudes on the drug evolved. And today, 29 states and the District of Columbia allow some form of legal marijuana. Our Dr. John LaPook is here. He joins us at the table. Welcome, Dr.
Morning,
LaPook.
Gail.
So there are 395 pages to the report. I can say you're the only one at the table that's read all 395.
This is true.
We're glad you did that because now you can share. What'd you learn? What'd you see?
Well, in terms of treatment, there's pretty solid evidence that can be helpful in alleviating chronic pain in adults, nausea from chemotherapy, and then spasticity or muscle spasm in people with multiple sclerosis. They also looked at a whole bunch of other things where there wasn't quite adequate research. They said we need more research for things like epilepsy, PTSD, even anxiety.
Were you surprised that there are some clear health benefits from marijuana?
Not at all. This drug, cannabis works on a system in our body called the endocannabinoid system, which is this amazing system that we're just starting to scratch the surface of. It's important for all sorts of things: pain, mood, anxiety, even immune function, reproductive function, blood vessel, heart. I mean, we're just figuring out. This is pharmacologically active, and it's not surprising to me at all that you can manipulate the system and get some benefits.
But it also lays out the risks.
Right.
Yeah.
Right?
There are risks. And, I spoke to 2 of the authors yesterday, and they pointed out it's so hard to figure out exactly what the risks are because a lot of this is based on self-reporting. There's more than 100 different cannabinoid chemicals that are in cannabis, and people take it all sorts of different ways. But the bottom line was they were most concerned, or one of the large areas of concern was with adolescents, right? The earlier you start using it, the greater the concern for abuse.
I'm asking this, is it because of the effect it has on your body, or because it's viewed in some cases as a starter drug, so you end up somewhere else in a much more severe drug?
Yeah, this is $1 million question, and of course the problem is figuring out, is it people who have that type of personality, they would have gone on anyway, or is it that this is somehow a gateway to it? And again, one of the problems is this all this self-reporting. We don't know exactly what people are taking. There's different forms, different ways of taking it, and it's hard to do the science.
I remember your 60 Minutes report. You went to Colorado, spent a lot of time there looking at recreational drug use. What do you think Colorado has learned that other states need to know?
I think it's terrific what they're doing there in terms of gathering statistics, first of all, to find out, where are you at the beginning? They say the other states should do that before they legalize, and then find out what's happening after legalization. Are there more problems? But very specifically, things like there were problems with edibles. So some of these edibles looked like little gummy
brownies?
bears, gummy bears for kids. So they changed it so it doesn't look like candy. And then brownies. People have to understand. You eat a brownie, it may take a couple of hours to get absorbed. So you say, "Oh, I'm fine. Have another brownie," and then a couple hours later it kicks in. You go out driving, and there's a big problem.
Thank you, John LaPook.
약물과 의식의 규제입니다. 의식은 정부가 법률로 움직일 수 있는 것일까에 대해서 심리학자들은 질문을 던집니다. 약물 중독의 대가는 사회에 의해서 치러집니다. 약물 중독은 범죄와 관련이 있는데 주로 마약 범죄로 인한 수감입니다. 약물과의 전쟁 프로그램은 효과가 없었다는 주장도 있습니다. 오바마의 새로운 해외 감소 접근은 오직 금지만이 중독에 대한 해결책이라는 생각에 이의를 제기합니다. 몇몇 지역에서는 효과적이었지만 결과는 아직 논의되는 중입니다. 최면은 암시성과 개인의 행동이 불수의적으로 일어난다는 느낌으로 특징되는 변형된 의식 상태입니다. 최면의 핵심은 의식적 의지 밖의 어떤 일들이 일어날 수 있음을 기대하도록 사람들을 이끄는 것입니다. 최면 민감성은 사람에 따라 매우 다르고 최면에 대한 동의를 조건으로 합니다. 최면 효과에 대해서 최면 상태에서의 초자연적인 묘기나 기억의 회상을 보인다는 주장은 논란의 여지가 많습니다. 최면 무통은 최면에 민감한 사람들에게서 관찰되는 최면을 통한 통증 감소입니다. 최면 무통 실험 사례입니다. 실험실에서 유도한 통증을 감소시키기 위해서 다양한 치료 기법을 적용한 후에 관찰된 통증 감소의 정도를 기록하였습니다. 최면이 통증 감소에 가장 효과적이었습니다. 명상은 내적 관주의 훈련입니다. 종교 안팎으로 다양한 기법이 존재합니다. 효과로 휴식, 활력, 심리적 행복이 있습니다. 장기적인 효과에 대해서는 논란이 있지만 연구들에서 일시적으로 뇌 활성화에 변화된 패턴이 나타납니다. 종교적인 기도 또는 예배 중에 변형이 나타나기도 합니다. 황홀감, 환희, 변환, 신비한 일치감 등을 경험하기도 합니다. 뇌 활성화는 간질의 경우에도 비슷하게 나타납니다. 명상은 신체 및 심리적 이점을 가져다 줄 수 있지만 이러한 이점이 어떤 기제를 통하여 발생하는가에 관해서는 아직 알려져 있지 않습니다. 종교적 황홀감과 간질은 우측 전방 측두엽에서 일어나는데 단지 그것 때문에 둘이 같은 기제라고 생각해서는 절대로 안 됩니다. 건강심리학에서는 명상에 대해서 많은 연구를 하는데 이를 mindfulness, 마음챙김이라고 합니다. 론 세겔 박사가 구글에서 마음챙김에 대해서 한 강연을 들어보시겠습니다.
Let's spend a few minutes doing some mindfulness practice together. And I invite you to put down whatever's in your hands and find a comfortable posture. I'm not sitting in those chairs, but look for a posture, and we'll do this with the eyes closed. And please do this, those of you who are listening to this on YouTube or are streaming it through the Google system. Just allow your eyes to close and find a comfortable posture in which your spine is more or less erect. And one way to find that posture is to imagine a string tied to the top of the head, sort of pulling toward the sky, gently elongating the spine. And in almost all mindfulness practices, what we do is we begin with a sensory object of awareness, some sensation that we can pay attention to. And arbitrarily, we're going to choose the breath right now. So just begin to notice the sensations of your breath. And notice all the feelings that are happening as you breathe in and as you breathe out. And see for a few moments if it's possible to follow the breath through its full cycles from the beginning of an inhalation to the end of an exhalation and on to the next. So we're just going to practice being aware of present experience with acceptance, focusing on the breath as an object of awareness. Now, it would not be unusual for thoughts to enter the mind. That's okay, they're our friends. We're not trying to chase them away. But instead of following a thought the way we normally would, we're just going to let it arise and pass, kind of like a cloud showing up and leaving the sky, gently returning our attention to the breath. This is a lot like puppy training. The mind scampers off, we gently bring it back to the breath. It scampers again, we gently bring it back again. And all of the other judgments, I like this, I don't like this, I can concentrate, I can't, I'm a good meditator, I'm a bad meditator, those are just other thoughts that we allow to arise and pass. Just gently training the mind for a few moments to step out of the thought stream and come to our senses. Gently bring the attention from the thoughts to the sensations here and now. And to bring this little period of practice to a close, I'm going to ring a bell and just listen to the bell from the beginning of the ring until it trails off and you can no longer hear it. And you can open your eyes again and check out the room and maybe stretch a tiny bit to feel your body. And perhaps you'll notice that just a very few minutes of beginning to train the mind and train the brain to come out of the thought stream and into sensory reality helps us to connect a little bit to what's happening here and now on a sensory level. And you may wonder, well, how is that? How is breath awareness, or doing something like that, how is that possibly going to help us to deal with all of life's difficulties and to deal with these different emotional states? And that's what I'd like to explain to you now, and then we'll talk about how to use these practices to work with some of the difficult states that arise.
다음은 어펜딕스입니다. 마인드풀니스가 어떻게 동작하는지 강의를 계속 들으시겠습니다. 지금까지 시청하신 것으로 이번 차수 수업이 인정됩니다.
And to understand this, I'd like you to imagine two very different days. On the first day, you haven't been sleeping well because you've had a bad cold. And to try to take care of yourself, you've been eating a lot of junk food and other comfort food, so you're not feeling terribly healthy. You haven't really been working out. You certainly haven't been meditating. You've been staying up kind of too late watching TV, just trying to feel a little bit better. You wake up in the morning after another fitful night, and you look out the window and, well, if you live where I do, it's 33 degrees and raining. And you feel kind of crummy, and if you live with somebody, you go into the kitchen, and you have one of those 5-minute interactions with another person that can just ruin your whole day. You know what these are like. They just start off bad and quickly escalate. And then you look at your appointment book, and you're meeting with many, many, too many people, and a lot of them aren't your favorites. And it's with this as a backdrop that you get into your car and you start driving to work. And at first, it's barely perceptible, but you think you maybe hear thump, thump, thump. But as the miles go by, it gets louder. Now it's definitely thump, thump, and then you feel it in the body, and it's thump, thump, and you've got a flat tire. And you just have the sense of, oh no, not today. I can't possibly bear this. Now imagine a wholly different day. You haven't had a cold or a virus. You've been sleeping well. You've been working out. Heck, you've been doing mindfulness meditation, right? You decide to take good care of yourself, so you go to bed nice and early. You wake up naturally without the alarm clock. You look out the window, it's 68 degrees and the sun is shining. And you go into the kitchen and you have one of those 5-minute interactions with another human being that makes you so glad to live in the world of fellow humans, to be with other people, to have relationship and connection. And you look at your appointment book, and it's a kind of Goldilocks day for whatever your profession is. Not so much work that you're going to be burnt out, not so little that you're going to starve or be fired. And you look at some of the people you're meeting with, and you realize, you know, if I weren't working with these folks professionally, I'd like to have them as my close personal friends. And it's with that as a backdrop that you get into your car, you're driving to work, you're seeing the sky, you're noticing the trees, and you're at a red light, and suddenly, bam, you get hit from behind. And you're startled, of course, but you realize, well, I'm okay. And you pull your car over, the other driver pulls their car over, and by some miracle, the other driver doesn't have character problems. They're like a reasonable, balanced person, and they say, oh, I'm sorry. And you exchange papers, and you just have this feeling that, oh, it could have been so much worse. I'm glad it's just, it's just going to be some money and some hassle, right? Now, on the first day, the intensity of the experience was a moderate challenge. It was a flat tire on a rainy day, but your capacity to bear it was way lower than that. So you really felt quite overwhelmed. On the second day, the intensity of the challenge was considerably greater, an automobile accident, but your capacity to bear adversity, your sense of resilience, was much higher than that, so you took it in stride. Many of the things we do to try to feel happier, and in fact, many psychiatric interventions, are designed to decrease the intensity of painful or uncomfortable experience. Mindfulness practice, the way it's going to work for us, is it's going to support experiential approach instead of experiential avoidance. Because when something uncomfortable comes up in mindfulness practice, instead of quick, how do I change it? How do I fix it? How do I make myself more comfortable? We learn to be with it. This starts at a very sensory level of simply when an ache or an itch arises, when we're doing meditation practice, you simply sit with the ache or the itch and maybe turn your attention to the ache or the itch instead of to the breath. And that develops this muscle, if you will, of being able to stay with or be with discomfort. It helps us to step out of the thought stream. Instead of believing in our thoughts so much, we start to see them as mental contents, as thoughts coming and going, so we don't get so trapped in them. In the process, interestingly, we become much less self-focused. So all of the nightmares about falling behind and not being good enough and not getting the best review at work and all of that, not that I don't want you to try hard at your work in Google, but all of the self-esteem concerns start to settle down because we're not always comparing ourselves with others. We're not so centered on ourselves anymore. By watching things change constantly in mindfulness practice, we start to get it that everything is a constant flux. Everything's constantly changing. So we're not as freaked out by our kids going off to college or some health problem or some other change. And finally, these help us to live in the present moment. And living in the present moment is enormously useful. One of my favorite studies in this area was done by a guy named Matthew Killingsworth, and he was a grad student at Harvard. He was in the lab of Dan Gilbert. Dan Gilbert wrote a book called Stumbling on Happiness. He's a guy who's done a lot of research in basically the things we do to try to be happy that don't work. So here was Gilbert's study. He developed a smartphone app, and this app would randomly page people throughout the day. And it would ask them three things. What are you doing? What are you feeling? And where was your attention at the moment that the phone paged you? And what he found was it didn't really matter what people were doing in terms of what they were doing did not predict how they'd feel. What predicted how they would feel was where their attention was at the moment the phone rang. So to use a rather stark example, if somebody were washing the dishes and were attending to the experience of washing the dishes, they reported more enhanced well-being than somebody who is eating the gourmet meal or making love, but thinking about other things. So simply training the attention to be in the present moment starts to increase our level of well-being.